Okay, so how many of you are struggling? You've said there's a number of you that have said we're trying to implement governance. How many of you are struggling?
I think in the organization, yeah, where I'm at, I'm not directly involved in data governance, but they are struggling with the data governance where I'm at.
Yeah. I am, because I've been accused of having a cottage industry.
What does that mean?
A backyard thing.
Like to add on to the normal business operation.
Okay.
Yeah, it's federated at a new level, I'm assuming.
Okay, so I think there, is that Renee speaking? I think that was exactly the challenge that I think a lot of people hit with data governance. And I'm actually just, so this is, I think the challenge we see in a lot of organizations, and I mean, we've been doing this for a long time as well, and we've had some level of success in some organizations and some level of failure in the same organizations in many cases. And a lot of the challenges that we experience are around the fact that there's competing interest in the business, and that in many times we don't, there's no relationship, or people in business in particular don't see the relationship between what you're trying to do with governance and what their goals and objectives are. Do you think that's a fair reality?
Yeah.
So it becomes, okay, well, IT is doing something again that's creating extra work for us.
Yeah, exactly that.
Okay. So this is a common problem that we've seen, and it's something that we've been I've been quite interested in for a number of years. And in fact, we brought a product to market. It's a long time ago now. It's nearly 10 years ago. And at the time, it was really focused on business value around governance, and there was a methodology around quantifying the value of what you're doing around data management and around governance. But we were just too early for market. People didn't understand what they were looking at. So I'm kind of trying to do this at a second, in a second iteration. The products have matured, they've become simpler. And I'll take you through the products in a little bit of time as well. I'm not going to go into detail and try and show you everything. But really what we're trying to do is we see when we're working with teams, often what we are interested in or what happens at a data governance level is it comes in down here at this tactical level, where the tactical teams are interested in the systems and the data. So you as an architect might, how important it is to document your environment, how important it is to understand your metadata, to understand your lineage, etc. But for the business, there's no relationship between what you're trying to do and what they're trying to do. So that's one of the challenges we're trying to address. The second thing that we see is that the way that data governance and data management tools have been set up historically is they really haven't been designed to enable business. So if I look at metadata management, I'm going to say, where metadata management probably started, it would have been with ETL vendors. So, if you were an IBM or an Informatica or one of those big ETL vendors 10 years ago, you would have had a very command line driven programming, scripting type environment. And over time, the need was identified to make that environment more intuitive. The number of scripts, the number of transactions, the number of transformations was becoming so large that nobody in the business could really understand what they were seeing. And so the metadata side was built to really try and build some business context around those ETL processes. And it had a fairly technical view, and it would have been in the early stages really focused around those particular platforms. So you would have had a metadata tool for your IBM environment, but if you had another ETL process running somewhere else in the organization, you might have had another metadata tool for that one. So we've then seen a second class of metadata tools coming out into play, also really looking at the bottom down about harvesting metadata, and I'm going to call those ones the data harvesters. So this is tools like Manta, for example, that we have in our stack, and a few others, where these guys are specialists in going into the databases, the BI tools, the ETL tools across your entire architecture and pulling out the technical metadata and cataloging that and building the relationship. So it's no longer dependency on a particular solution stack. It's looking to build the technical metadata across your entire solution stack. But again, you know, not bringing the data in from a business perspective. It's really looking at this context from a technology perspective. That's where we started. What we then saw happening, sorry, I'm just trying to get my presentation to move, is we now start to see the data governance vendors coming into play probably about 5 or 6 years ago, where they were very much more business oriented, but a lot of the data governance vendors in those early days were very focused on specific use cases. So particularly, for example, in banking around risk management. So you would see specialist vendors for anti-money laundering, specialist vendors for know your customer, specialist vendors for BCBS 239, and so on and so forth. But difficult to get those top-down use cases to link into the technical stuff at the bottom. So it tended to be a bit of an integration level, and difficult often to get those tools to scale beyond the original use case. So the third area was really sitting sort of somewhere in the middle, where you're looking at more of your data management capabilities, but again, not really looking at bringing together the top and the bottom. And this is kind of where the market has been over the last 5 years. And what we're now seeing is the shift towards bringing all three of these approaches together into a single platform, where different stakeholders can look at the same information or look for the same information coming either top down or bottom up or from the middle, you know, and trying to understand their data in context and how it helps to support their specific goals and objectives. Thoughts, comments? Anyone agree or disagree with what I'm saying here?
I really like your, I really like what the slide is talking to. So yeah, it's a good narration of what happened and still happens in a lot of places. So yeah, I like it.
Okay, cool.
Gary?
So I'm not going to, yeah.
Gary, so yeah, just to maybe take you through several experiences I've had with different financial services with respect to BCBS and Basel and stuff like that. So the one I was involved in was specifically with Ab initio, and it had the metadata hub, but it was interesting because it was there to deliver on compliance. Okay, so the tool was chosen, Ab initio, to move the data, but it was also chosen to handle the metadata management from a data governance point of view. So that was almost a concurrent thing that was happening in terms of data governance pushing down and choosing a tool that's going to come from the bottom up. And it was there to try to, we all know what happens with the banks when they get a new regulations they need to deal with. They scurry around from both sides, probably driven from governance, but finding the tool that supports them and then trying to piece that thing together in terms of presenting it in a way that business can sign off. And I suppose if we go with BCBS, that was all about no longer programming in PowerPoint, but having the appropriate metadata that could be presented to the regulator and for it to be signed off.
Correct. So Hardy, if I can extend, you know, it's one of the confusion points that comes into play is people think of metadata management and data governance as being synonymous. So a lot of times in the early days when we were talking about data governance, we talk about the definition of a customer, and that's actually got nothing to do with governance. Right. That's metadata management, right? So there's a confusion level that says in order to comply, I've got to have a business glossary, which is true. There does need to be a business glossary. There does need to be data lineage. There does need to be the data dictionaries, etc., that show where your data is coming from and your data quality. But what there also needs to be is the audit trail around the decision-making processes, you know, that said, yes, this is the correct definition. Yes, it's been approved. Yes, it's agreed consistently, etc. And a lot of those processes, the bottom-up processes, tend to forget about that sort of audit trail layer. So they're not doing the governance. They're building metadata.
Okay. Okay. All right. Yeah, because I remember us having to get the CFOs to sign the final document. You know, what was it? It was T+4 or T+5, where we had to show them the transformations I forget the term, and they had to be able to validate that nothing was fiddled with outside of this data movement. So there was no playing around with it manually.
Yep, exactly. But you know, it's anyway. It's all dependent on emails and signatures and somebody's word, rather than an audit trail that can actually prove the reality. So that's really where we're shifting towards. Okay. So let me move on to, you know, what are we talking about when we're talking about business ready data? Really, it's a combination of factors. So the one I really want to focus on this afternoon, and depending on time, I might go a little bit beyond this, but data that's ready to deliver outcomes. So one of the challenges we've seen at another customer of ours, and I won't mention the name of the organization, but they've got a technical metadata harvesting tool that has gone into their organization and effectively pulled in a view of every data attribute in the organization. So they are sitting with literally millions of documented attributes with no context, and all that's happened is they've been overwhelmed by the volume of detail. So one of the things that's really important to understand around governance is that you don't need to govern all of your data. It's not all equally valuable. It's something that you can do, I don't want to say piecemeal, but that you can do in a sequential fashion where, you know, and in this particular methodology that I'm going to demonstrate a little bit later on, we can start, for example, with particular business goals and objectives, and we can identify the data elements and the data assets that are related to meeting those particular goals and objectives, and govern those, document those, put the processes in place to manage that set of data, knowing that it's going to help us to achieve a business outcome, and that we can then, you know, track that with our metrics and our scoring, identify who the owners are, put the correct processes in place to manage the data, etc. So we want to get data that's ready to deliver an outcome. If we didn't want to go with a goal or an objective, we could do, for example, do something like start the top 5 reports that go to the board. So the board cares about these 5 reports. It's a monthly report. Go in and build governance just around those 5 reports, so that we're showing the value to the executives in terms of saying, here's your decision making, here's how we're building trust. So that comes into our second approach of getting business ready data, is to look at key reports, key performance indicators, and then build our governance just around that subset again of our data assets. So in each of these approaches, what we're looking to do is to build a slice of value in as much depth as possible or necessary to deliver value for that slice, but without trying to solve the problem for the entire organization, or without even trying to create a data governance organization for the whole organization. Because this way we can effectively link what we're doing to a specific business outcome, and that's what helps us to get the buy-in and the support. And then the last thing we want to do is to create data that's easy to find and understand, and we really do that around document. That's really where we come into documenting the metadata and giving the data context, which is really difficult to do without a tool, but some people have succeeded, I guess. And they really, I'm not going to read this slide, and it's the last slide I'm going to go into, and then I'm going to flip over into the demonstration. But that's, you know, this is the last step, is to say, using technology, how do we take this massive complexity that we have in most organizations and make it viable, that we can actually find what we're looking for with the right context at the right time, that different users can go in and reuse this information, that the information is visible and available to everybody in the organization that uses it. So it's another pet bugbear of mine, is the people that say, well, I've built a business glossary, but, you know, it's hidden behind our firewall and it's only accessible to 2 people because it's secret. And this really seems to be a cultural mentality of organizations, of we don't want to share the business glossary or the other context that we're providing around our data. We seem to be afraid of it. Whereas what we found is, if you publish something, even if it's imperfect, what then that gives is, that creates the opportunity for the users of that element to go, this is not working for me. This is not the way we define customer, as an example. These are the tweaks and changes we'd like to see. This is the alternative definition that needs to happen. And you start to get the engagement from the business because they're getting value from the asset. So what we want to be able to do is to take business ready data, publish it in a format that's accessible to as many people as possible, anybody that needs to use it, so that we can help them to deliver their outcomes, so that we can show them how we're helping other people to build trust in their reports, and so that we get the buy-in and the support from them moving forward. What are your thoughts on that, people, as I'm exit the presentation. Anyone got any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, just to say, Gary, you've been making very good points, and that's critical. You know, you're explaining an organic, organic value approach, which I like. If you want to solve the world's problems, it just never works, which I think that's a problem with a lot of data governance initiatives or other other things you're doing within the context of some other data management subject area. But yeah, you're right. You have to find a way to. I mean, Howard, we talked about that last week. You need to be better than what you were, even if you're not where you are. You're not where you want to be yet, but you're better than when you were yesterday. It's that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And to make it real within the data governance conversation is so important, because I mean, data governance, even that's why you asked in the beginning who's trying to do that. It can mean a lot of things, and it does mean a lot of things, so this is a particular context, but developing a data strategy is also part of data governance. Dealing with ethics on a very esoteric scale is also data governance in the sense. So, but I like how you bring it down to something that, okay, so we're talking about alignment with some other business goal or objective, and what did you say? You use slices, just slices of values. The word you used, which it rings true. Put it that way.
So I mean, I just thought, let me throw this up here. I don't like to try and define data governance because I find it gets really messy. But what I've tried to do is to say, what is data governance about? So this is my personal way of talking about data governance. It's about ensuring that the right people are involved at every step of the data management process, making decisions, understanding impacts, applying context, prioritizing deliveries, and staying informed. So it's not about documenting metadata. It's about having the right people involved at the right time to do what needs to be done. And I think that's where a lot of organizations fall over, is we get stuck in the minutiae rather than focusing on the end game.
Yeah.
I think maybe just to also add there, as in agreement with what everyone else has said. So in the organization I'm currently working at, one of the biggest challenges that we found was that, which I think you highlight a lot in your presentation, around transparency. We didn't know who's actually involved from a data governance point of view. We actually found out recently there is a data governance board, which in a sense we felt didn't actually include all the necessary people involved in it. Yeah, so I think that there was a hope, and I mean, we actually found out that during those data governance board meetings, there was no documentation of decisions made. There were a lot of issues that we picked up around that.
Yep. And that's not an uncommon problem. So I'm going to speak very briefly to another one that I find quite entertaining, and it's a frequent challenge, is that people seem to think when they pull in a consultant that data governance and metadata management is a silver bullet. So the number of times we've been asked for people, by customers to say, please give us a business glossary. A business glossary is the definition of terms as you use them in your business. So, it's to get people to understand that they need to take ownership. You need to start small, and it's very much a change management process. Getting that visibility in is important, and then involving the right people at the right time. So that's again where visibility comes into play, is people can start to find stuff if it's accessible to them. So yeah. Yeah.
Gary, do you mind if you asked us to share as much as we could, so I'm taking this opportunity. And Marcel's got his hand lifted as well. So Marcel, would you like to comment?
Yeah, and Gary has been walking this road with us for quite some time now. But what I've realized is that, yes, you can have a business glossary, taxonomy, and all that, and you can have it all in Excel. But the shareability of that is where the biggest challenges come from. So if you cannot expose it and cannot make it usable for people, then it's pretty much a useless exercise to continue with, because having it in Excel, don't integrate doesn't allow you to integrate into your application environment. It doesn't provide you with the capability to share with people. So it kind of reduces the impact that it really can have, and people loses very quickly trust in what we have done.
And then Liana also had a hand up, so let's do that one and see if Gary would answer both of them.
Short comment, can you hear me though?
Yes, we can.
Okay, so coming to the same points, agreeing with everybody, but also adding a people aspect of the importance of slicing the information. So at least in my experience, I've dealt with a lot of very demotivated data governance people who feel like they're not getting their voices heard or they're not getting anywhere. But also, it's in that sense, it's important to make the work manageable and divide it into priorities, so the progress is actually showing, that the people who work on it can feel like they've accomplished something and it shows, you're getting results. Because if you try to govern everything, it's not going to show for a long time, and it feels like the people who are working on it are not making any progress. So that's my 5 cents.
Thanks, Liana. Yeah, I think that's critical, that iterative approach, and I think Gary brought that out by looking at the critical data elements and things like that. That also then goes into the next level of how do we decide on that. Gary? Thanks,
Howard. So what I'm going to do, I've got an interface open here. So what you can see, and this is really a trend that's happening more and more, is that most of these enterprise metadata management, data governance applications are shifting towards a cloud-based approach. So they typically are storing only metadata. They're not storing your customer information or other personal information. They're storing information about your customer, and they're doing that in the cloud. So what we see is we've actually got a hosted application. You can see the URL at the top there. And if this was, I just lost my screen. That was, let me wake it up. And that would typically then be linked into your enterprise environment with a connection to your single sign-on application. And then what you would have is you would have your data quality components and your metadata harvesting components sitting inside your organization, so that any integration that's happening, any actual access to your backend databases is happening behind your firewall, and only the metadata that you allow to be sent is actually being pulled by the metadata tool to the or being pushed to the metadata tool. So that's the starting point. Is we have a browser interface, which means it's really easy for anybody in the organization to log in. Typically, what's happening more and more with this kind of technology, the business-oriented ones, is that they're designed to have a read-only author or a read-only user license that allows effectively the enterprise, anybody in the enterprise, to access the environment, have visibility into the assets that are not restricted for general, to specific environments or specific purposes, so that anybody can go in. And let me just start. I'm going to take you through a couple of things. A starting point would be a search. So I could say, for example, I want to search, we're working with contact email because we're trying to improve the quality of our email addresses. Let's go and look for contact email address. And I can actually see I've got a business term called contact email address, and it brings it up and it gives me context. So it's quite quick and easy to find particular information. What I then have is I have a bunch of fields and categories and relationships that are linked to this particular type of asset. In this case, this is a business term. And again, this is totally configurable within the front end. I can go in and I can make changes to what fields and what information I want to capture. I can see immediately who my responsible parties are in terms of different roles in my organization. Again, configurable depending on what your organization looks like, etc., etc. So I'm not going to bore you by trying to take you through all of this information. I'll come back to some of it in a minute. What we can see on the left-hand side, it shows me a whole bunch of different capabilities. So what we've done is we've basically broken up our business model. We've said we've got business assets, and these are things like our analytics models, our dashboards, our reports, etc., etc. And we've got technical assets, which is really more our data dictionaries and our physical schemas. And again, this is configurable. I can go in and I can add different asset types and classes and bring these into my governance model and structure. Where life starts to get more interesting when we start to talk about governance is I can start to look now at defining my data standards and policies. So for example, I'm going to take a quick look into this one. I've gone in very quickly and I've defined at a very high level. We've got the Protection of Personal Information Act, and what we can see with Poppy, here's a copy of the Act. I can link now to the actual published Act as it's published by the South African government, and I can start to break this down into its sub goals and division. So in this case, it's the parent of a bunch. Here's the conditions for lawful processing. So I can basically break this down or bring my regulations in. And as I start to break these down into more detail, then I can start to associate specific assets with specific, in this case, rules, standards, regulations, policies, etc. that I might have, and I can start to track the compliance to policy. These are all kind of fairly standard situations. I've got various rules. I've got data quality rules. I've got reference data tables. So I can manage my reference data, etc., etc. But really what I wanted to focus on today for the purpose of this conversation is to say, how do we make this stuff more relevant to business? And what becomes interesting here is we start to look at our objectives and metrics. So what we're doing is we're now starting to define within the data model, we're defining the specific rules and regulations and goals that as a business we're trying to achieve. So in this case, we can see the compliance officer, he's got the data privacy regulations he needs to comply with. If I drill down into this regulation, I can start to understand, well, how does this impact him? What are we doing to solve my data privacy regulation? I can go into a visualization of this. So this is where we start to see different views of the same data. In this case, I want to have a look at an impact view. So what this is showing me now is just, okay, I'm going to move things around to make them a little bit better. But in this particular case, we're seeing that the data privacy regulation is governed by our retention policies. It's governed by, in this case, a regulation, which is the protection of personal information. And then I can start to bring in my business terms. And right now, I've only got one link, which is my contact email address. So we can see that this particular data privacy regulation relates to these particular data business terms. And as I drill down or continue further into this one, if I wanted to, so I can navigate to this particular term, I can now start to see in this term again the technical assets that are related to this particular. So I can really just start to draw through my data and start to understand the impact of how does, you know, in this particular case, which processes use it, who's responsible for it, what metrics is it used for. Okay, it's used for another objective. So this one is also important to gaining a 360-degree view of the customer. So now what I can start to infer is the fact that my objective to gain a 360-degree view of the customer is actually affected by my data privacy regulation and my data privacy initiative. So we're starting to build the business relationships between different executives or different areas, goals and objectives, and how data is supporting each of these. This then in turn allows us to start to prioritize what are we going to do around this. If I, you know, so I can now start to say, well, I need to take an action. With my contact email address, I have a question. Have we thought about how this impacts campaigns or whatever it might be? So we really are trying to build a network where, in this case, we're going top down. We can look at our objectives or our goals. From our goals, we can break them down into specific objectives. So objectives are getting more tactical. Each of our objectives, we've got a 360-degree view of the customer. We can start to look at that. Again, this is all configurable, but I can start to identify who's responsible for it, what actions are in place, what workflows are running to support that, and again, what assets are related to this particular goal and objective. So that's the one area where we're looking top down. We can start to categorize. Instead of trying to categorize by a data subject or a domain or a report, I can link it to a business goal and the business objectives related to that goal, and I can start to see how it affects multiple goals. What's the thoughts at that level? Let me take a pause and just get feedback.
Okay, Gary, there were a few. So let's start off Marcel's first question, and then he got involved with a few more. So his first question was, can you expose this interface to external partners?
Yes, because it's a web browser-based interface. So remember, it's hosted externally. It's available to anybody that would have access. So it could be that you would have a single sign-on and you would link to multiple single sign-on environments. It could be adding them to a group within your own SSO environment. From a security perspective, it's possible to block access to the application, also to restrict access to particular IP ranges. So depending on how you've set up your security, you might need to add additional IP ranges and add additional SSO connections, etc., in order to do that. But yes, it's absolutely possible.
Okay. And then the next one is, I suppose, something that I'm quite passionate about, is when you build your data strategy, it's fundamental to link that to your business value chain and your capabilities, and then almost to your business strategy. So how would we bring those type of things in? I mean, there's a whole hierarchy of levels within that. So it tends to go your value drivers, your value chain, your business capabilities, linked to your business information, linked to types of data, and then your operating model starts to bring in when we have the SWOTs around the challenges that the business is facing, and then the opportunities. How would we connect all of this stuff into this type of? Is it something that we customize in terms of building these hierarchical relationships or associations? I think it's a graph database, so it can go anywhere basically.
So I'm going to I don't want to close what I've got open currently, but if I go down to my configuration, I can start to add additional assets, so business assets, technical assets, whatever my types of assets are, and I can also add relationships. So as a straightforward example, I can go in here and I can say, okay, I want to, this is obviously I've got administrator access and not everybody could do that, but I want to now have a new asset that I've created. I want to create an analytic model and create a predicate. It's completely configurable. So it comes with an off-the-shelf data or model. Another example, just to use an example, is I could say I want to go with COBIT, and I want to go and look at the goals and objectives of COBIT and the principles to break it down. And I could build the whole of COBIT into this and then start to link COBIT to my data models. It doesn't say it's off the shelf because not everybody uses COBIT, but if that's your preferred, you can do that. Yes, totally configurable and very quick and easy to do, in fact.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Any other questions?
Gary, so I just want to check, this is Calibra, right?
This is actually Infoject Data 360.
Oh,
so we also look after Calibra, and they've each got pros and cons. So I'm showing you something different for a change.
Oh, there is. Yeah, I remember Greg Withers was into this stuff as well. Okay, that's pretty cool. So business assets, technical assets, those are concepts that comes out, kind of as part of the shell. You need to go and configure things and pull things in and so forth. But the terminology there, business assets and technical assets, as an example, is that standard standard terminology that comes with the tool?
It's standard terminology that comes with the tool, but you can change it or add to it. So it's not like this is you have to use it.
Yeah.
So it tends to be quite a common categorization. So looking at Calibra talks about governance assets, data assets, business assets, and technical assets. So they've got a slightly larger set of categories. So, business assets, just have a quick look at them. We tend to be the stuff that's more business facing. So in this case, business terms as an example. Reports would be another example. Technical assets tends to be the stuff that's IT is more interested in. So that might be systems, files, etc. I mean, I'm just going to go right down to table column level. Yeah, now we've got a data dictionary. If I drill into my data dictionary, what I'm starting to see is from my related assets, well, okay, what business terms use this dictionary? You can just see what have we got. Here's all this. These are all the transformations. This is all my lineage I'm showing around this particular asset. I've never looked at it before in my life. So, but just to give you an idea, it's a data model.
Yeah. And I'm just wondering, so for example, to get more technical assets into this, is there a, do you have to connect it to a database, or does it have some kind of a
Yeah,
crawler?
so what we have is we have a very powerful connector that I've been playing with for a while, which is workflow driven. So if you want me to, I'm going to pop that up. Let me just open it in another window while I'll pop up. The data connector is very quick and easy. So I've built a connector between Infogix and Trillium. It's taken me about 2 weeks. So, you know, you can connect at an API level or at a database level, or you could, basically there's a whole bunch of connectors available that allows you to connect and transform the data through a GUI. Similarly, to build workflows, you go in and you build a workflow with a very simple drag and drop interface.
Right. Cool. And the the things that you talked about, the goals and objectives, those are typically things that you would, you know, when you start, those are, you kind of do that through workshopping and whatnot and determine what those should be, or maybe put it from the business architecture, something like that, right?
Well, exactly. Typically, in this case, you'd be pulling it from the business. So, you know, Derek O'Brien made the joke about governed by value or governed by values. Your goals and objectives could be your corporate values. You know, we have a value that says data must be accessible. So one of the customers we're working with at the moment, which is a large multinational, well, it's actually a non-governmental organization, but their goal is to make self-service BI available. So they want the organization to be able to find and access data, but they want to do that in a secure way so that sensitive data is not made available willy-nilly. So their goal and objective is actually to make data more accessible and to enable self-service BI. It's a goal. What's that aligned to? I can't tell you because they actually haven't defined that for us. But why are you doing these projects? Why are we building a master data hub? Why are we building a new data warehouse? There's business goals behind that, and very often as IT, we tend to lose sight of those business goals and then struggle to communicate value from that perspective.
So at the moment in this demo, just go to objectives again. So
I'm going to do that right now. Yep, here's objectives.
Am I looking, I don't know if my screen is a bit slower. I'm looking at...
Get a 360-degree view of the customer.
Okay, I see that. All right, so the goals and objectives on this level is still quite related to data. It's not directly tied from here to some other bit.
Here's the goal. It says I want to increase the sales pipeline. So in this case, the actual goal from the VP of sales is to increase the sales pipeline. As part of that intention, one of his goals has been to get a 360-degree view of the customer. So if I go to the goal, that's at a much higher level. And now I want to see, well, what objectives do I have? So I've got increased inbound call quantity, increased outbound call quantity per sales rep, increase in outbound, et cetera, et cetera. How do we, what are we doing from a data architecture perspective or data management perspective to support this particular goal? Because at the end of the day, this is a data tool. This is not a spreadsheet, not a PowerPoint.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Cool.
Okay. So very quickly, what I want to segue into, this is where life gets a little bit entertaining, is now I'm sitting at an individual value. I'm looking at contact email address, and we really get into data value. So what Infogix have done, basically, they've got their own internal algorithm, or you might use your own algorithm. And in this case, what they've done is they've actually used the Infonomics methodology that's been published by Doug Laney at Gartner, which is effectively allowing us to calculate value for an individual asset. And you know, I'm gonna smile. I am smiling a little bit as I talk to this, because I think this is very clearly a work in progress. It's a very early stage of maturity in terms of us as a profession understanding how to value data. But I think this is the first time I've seen any vendor bring the capability to monitor the value of data over time. And you know, so for example, if we look at intrinsic value, that's a score that's related directly back to the underlying data quality and lineage and trust of the data, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm not going to try and go through the methodology now. Truthfully, I don't understand this one myself very well. But one can also then use one's own value. So, or something I've seen, for example, could be, what is the value of sales? Well, you look at the total sales value. So you can look at your key risk indicators or your key performance indicators and the actual values, the aggregate scores you get for, you know, the number of hours it costs an employee to, or the cost per hour of an employee, the average cost per hour. You can use those kind of scores to actually start to calculate the value of fields that impact that employee as well. So I just wanted to bring this last piece into play as well, to start to say, you know, this is now looking bottom up at the level of an individual business term. We can start to score value based on how it gets used in the value, and we can then use that into various other scores. So that's really the last thing I just want to touch on. Thoughts? We've got about 15 minutes for conversation and anything else people would like to talk.
Hi, Gary. My name's Tony. Can you hear me?
Yes, Tony. How are you?
Fine. Thank you. Yourself?
Good, thanks.
You're talking about being able to interface or interact with databases. Can you generate a database from this tool?
Yeah, so I'm just busy opening the. So what I want to say is, look, it's not a data modeling tool. It's not intended to replace a full-on data modeling tool, but you can do some level of data modeling. As this thing opens up, I'm just going to take an example of a rule, of a flow. So this is the data integration layer. This one would sit on premise, you know, in behind somebody's firewall. So what I'm doing here with these, and hopefully I'm going to answer your question along the way. Here I'm just reading. Let me pick this one. I'm going into I'm making an API call against the REST API. This is the API call that's being made. It's a get method, and what it returns me after a couple is a JSON file. And if I interpret the JSON file, what I'm seeing is the data quality rules coming out of Govern that we were just looking at, but they're now being presented in a table. I'm then taking them through a bunch of different processes, and at the end of it all, I'm putting a put process here where I'm putting these data quality rules into my Trillium data quality library. So I'm basically building a synchronization between Govern and the Trillium data quality library. Now that simplistically is a flow. So what I'm doing here is I'm doing some transformations, I'm doing some joins. So here I'm doing an intersection or a union, etc., etc. I'm doing some modification, I'm calculating fields, I'm splitting fields. So if I'm doing this at a database level, I can effectively go in and I can say, all right, for example, the simplest way to do it is a Jdbc query, go in there and set up my database table. I'm going to run this through a database query, which I'm not even going to try and set up right now. And then as an output connector, I can have a database. Give me a second. I can have a database. I just got to find my output. I'll probably write down the bottom. Yeah, they are. So I can now output to a database as well. Got to find one. Jdbc store. All right. So using the same model, I can go into the Govern data dictionary, and I can pull out a technology asset or a technical asset, which could be this particular table or this particular table column. I can make modifications, add a column here, and then use that to publish those columns into a database. What is more, the real intention here, though, is more to keep track of what's going on with your data models. So what we're trying to do. Sorry, I just want to come back to this. What we're trying to do, really more so than really act as I say, as a full-blown data modeling tool, is harvest the Jdbc metadata. So what I want to be able to do is to say, I actually want to read the metadata for this particular database. I just got to find it. Change metadata. Sorry. I want to get the metadata for this database. So in this case, I don't have a database set up, but if I did, my next step is going to go in there. It's going to read the technical metadata, and that's going to, so it's going to be my table structures, my procedure names, etc., etc., etc. It's going to give me my metadata. And so what we're trying to do really with this is more to say, as the database's structures change internally within my organization, or as my data flows change within my organization, update the data governance tool so that when we're looking at the impact of how data is being used in the organization, we're actually tracking reality rather than what we thought we had.
Okay.
So yeah, Tony, I hope that answers your question.
Yes, thank you very much.
This little tool is incredibly powerful, I have to say. It's also available as a standalone tool. So it's been really quite interesting to me how much I've been able to achieve with it. Having previously tried to play with tools like Mule and various other rather nasty integration tools, this one's really made integrating at an API level quick and easy. Other questions?
Yeah, Gary, I've got, I just want to track back onto your value, and I suppose that's key for me in terms of clearly understanding the value. Now, you seem to have two different values here. One is, let's say, for example, I've got my objectives, my metrics, and my KPIs, and one would assume that I set those objectives with the business, and by delivering on that, I'm providing value. So we've got that value, which is almost a data management enablement value, and then we've got data value. And those things, they don't seem to be connected. They seem to be separate. So there's almost, in a way, one would say, if I have a business capability, for example, and I suppose let's just look at that in terms of a complete view of the customer, or customer enablement or customer experience from a capability point of view, and the metrics would be to improve the customer experience or whatever it is. And so we would then, in a way, the sort of value lines are running in parallel, but they're not connected.
Yeah, so the one is top down and the other one is bottom up. And in all honesty, when I first proposed this topic, my intention was to focus on the goals and objectives, because I actually believe that that's a far more useful metric. I just wanted to show this, and as I said to you, I was smiling a little bit when I showed it, because the whole concept of infonomics is still in its infancy. There's still a lot of debates about. But what's interesting is the fact that somebody's at least thinking about this. So what would happen here is when I'm measuring my goals and objectives, what I can then start to do is I can start to roll up the value scores from the underlying data assets that I've applied a data value to, a data value to, so that I can start to get a rolled up score for my goal or for my metric. But I think what for me is really not fascinating, but what I really like about this approach, it's something that's been lacking in a lot of other technology, is the communication capability that this gives you. Of I don't have to go and talk to my chief of marketing about why customer contact email needs to be cleaned up. I can show this because it's directly aligned to him achieving his goal. So, my data quality rules become linked to a goal. My underlying metadata lineage becomes linked to a goal, etc. So it helps us as a business to prioritize according to business goals and objectives and deliver value, or as Derek might say, values. And I haven't seen anything else that actually brings us all together. And then there's the dashboards, etc. I'm not going to try and show you the dashboards, because quite honestly, I don't have access to the dashboards. They're behind a firewall that I don't have access to in the shared environment. But there's a lot of visualizations as well where we can start to show the value of the data and our relationships to meeting the goals and objectives, etc.
Yes,
and so that we stop working in silos.
Yeah. So I quite like this in a way that when we build a data strategy and we focus on the business value chain, we then bring it through the capability to the data value chain. And the data value chain is how the data is being enriched and how it's improving along the way. And that certainly relates to the value, the assets, the data areas in terms of the value there. And I suppose it's just connecting it to the right point so that the objectives and metrics are lining up and ensuring that we're increasing the value on the data value chain as well.
Exactly. And that's where the tool is very configurable. And the honest reality is there are other tools out there which are also configurable.
Yeah.
But the difference is these guys have come from the perspective of this is the philosophy behind the technology. And I think that's the big, you know, it's important to me to understand the philosophy that a vendor is coming the party with, because it drives their whole development strategy. It drives the way that they configure the interface. I really like the fact that they're putting, you know, this executive view front and foremost, and then from there we can go down into, well, you know, how many business terms do we need to capture, and what reports and what metrics, etc., do we need to support each of these goals and objectives, rather than starting from the principle of how do we document our technical processes and then try and get business interested in.
Yeah, yeah. And then could I ask a slightly different question, unless anyone's got a question on value? Is there anyone with value? Any other further questions on value? Okay, if there are no more further questions, I mean, when you mentioned the finding, and almost we're now getting more and more into the realm of the classification, and not just from a sensitivity point of view, but from a business context, and the semantic tags. I see there's semantic tags. Can you build the taxonomies that will allow people to navigate the hierarchies of, for example, time series? So as an example, I'm interested in a specific quarter period time series on GDP, and that's an economic concept, and that's related to, so I've got a hierarchy of structures to that, because GDP is made up of 14 areas. Can you build that sort of taxonomy classification?
Yes.
And can people navigate that to see the assets associated with it?
Yes. So, you know, in this case, what we've done is we happen to be calling them categories, but I think that's what you're referring to. So it's basically bringing, in this case, we've got a customer category, and we can see different kinds of objects falling into that category. And again, this is completely configurable. So it really depends on how you want to define your taxonomy and your categories. Same thing with tags, they're completely configurable. You can bring in your own, you can navigate by tag, you can search by tag, etc., etc. So where governance is shifting towards, and where metadata management in general is shifting towards, is a collaborative crowdsourced model. Because again, you know, I can put myself into an organization or Paul into an organization, and we can sit there for 6 months trying to document metadata and get nowhere. But if everybody in the organization takes 5 minutes to document the one keyword that's their core business, you know, subject matter area of expertise, then we build capability very quickly. So we're really shifting towards publish it and then collaborate, rather than wait for perfection and then publish it just.
Sure. But you know, I was thinking of things like STMX for time series data, statistical time series. They've got a fantastic catalog and category and taxonomy, but that just about brings it in, and then at least have something, and then start to collaborate on that and improve.
Yeah. So it's a common approach. So, you know, there's the FIBO for, there's a bunch of different vocabularies out there that one can inherit. So
yeah,
again, going to administration, I can do a bulk upload.
Okay.
I can do, you know, I can do loading via my API. So it's not a question of saying don't use, but one of the challenges that we have is people. There's also this belief that says I want to pull down the perfect financial services glossary from the internet that's going to solve all of my problems. And the reality is it's a starting point, but you need to adapt that to your requirements.
So just what you're saying here seems interesting, in that I could connect it to, for example, if I have Power Designer, I could connect the link here to pull out my FIBO data model from there, and bring those tags or the classifications or the derivative product structures into something like this.
Exactly. And that's really, a lot of those connections already exist. So, you know, anything that's in here, you can start to pull out. So it's just giving you an idea. Yeah, as assets, I want to be able to get an asset, update an asset. And this could be a technical asset. It could be an objective. It could be so you can do everything via the API. And then, you know, that's how you automate your long-term processes. Again, using the data flow engine to go and build the actual connections, typically that would pull in and out on either side and do the transformations and the filters.
Right. Because I think that's a big issue of keeping your data models and your glossaries and your assets and your tags all in the same area. Now, I know there's some comments by Marcel. Marcel, would you like to share some of the stuff you're talking about?
No, sure. The question was just about publishing this to, because typically what Bank of England do, they publish their glossary to the public. So that creates cross national integration and commonality of terms and definitions used for reporting purposes. So I'd like just to understand if this has the capability to do that publishing to the public, because you talked about having quite a rigid access model to have access to the information, which would be relevant for the maintenance of it, but how would you expose it into the public?
Gary, I think you're on mute. You may be talking to yourself, hopefully.
Thanks, I was indeed. So one of the things I can do, Marcel, is I can export anything to Excel, and once it's in Excel, I can publish it via a variety of, as Excel, for example. Another thing that I could do is I could create a guest user access and give guest users access, read-only access to a limited subset of my data model. So there are different ways of doing something like that, but without investigating in detail, I can't answer the question with a spectacular answer for you.
Sorry, what's that?
No, a guest account would be great, Gary, and then you can at least manage the public information that should be publicly available and visible.
Okay, right.
So what I would probably do, Marcel, is I would probably use the integration layer to pull out the stuff that I want to publish, to package it into, for example, a web page format, and then publish it as a web page rather than giving them direct access to the back end of the tool. I think for one thing, you might create a performance issue for your actual internal users if you have 1 million people from the public all going to the same page. So I would probably say that the best route to go would be to take the data that you want to publish, pull that out via the API, via the integration layer, and then push that to, for example, a web page. That would be a simple way to keep it in sync. You could run that and update the sync on a daily basis. One of the things, just to show very quickly, this is another thing that I've been working with, is I'm pulling down XML data, which is, there's something called the, I'm trying to think what the, FPML, it's a financial services, FPML.org,
it's a product model.
So what I've done here is I've just said, right, so now I'm pulling out the product model, I'm breaking it down into its elements so that I can push these elements into and create a category for FPML, and we're doing that for one of our customers at the moment. So, maintaining this is really what I'm going to call reference data, but in this case, it's a reference data model. So I could take the same thing and I could do this in the opposite direction of pulling the data out of Data 360 and pushing it into, for example, a web page or another format that I want to publish.
Yeah. So so that would most probably make it usable then for the public also, because you don't want to make it too rigid. So would it be possible maybe to expose the API for the people to get access to the information also, or would that be the best option, doing it that way?
Cheapers. Marcel, I think that one warrants investigation. Truthfully, what I would want to understand is what are the limits. So what I would rather be doing is setting up a standard API flow that, for example, generates a JSON file and feeds it into a distribution mechanism, rather than exposing the API to the general public, because remember, the API then, depending on your access control, gives you complete read-write access to the tool. So through the API, you could generate, for example, a Kafka feed and just say we're going to push a JSON message onto this feed, and it's going to happen every hour or every day, or based on the period. You could certainly do that, but I would want to be doing that in a governed, controlled way, not willy-nilly opening it to the public. I think that would get dangerous.
And they tend to be in DMZs, so you've got DMZs in between this stuff. So you got some challenges there. But anyway.
Interesting. Thanks.
So Gary, just theoretically, from a licensing perspective, if you would want to actually give people direct access to this from the public, how would that work from a licensing perspective?
Well, are you referring to a read?
Paul, I'm not even going to try and answer the question.
Yeah, I'm trying to. Yeah, so just in theory, if you want to expose this without exporting it to.
So the way that Data 360 and Calibra, for that matter, are licensed is effectively on the principle of there's a platform cost, which includes a certain number of read licenses, which is reasonably large, but it's intended for internal consumption. It's not open to the public. And then there is a cost per author license, which are the users that actually physically make changes and approvals and what have you on the data set. Now, if we wanted to say we want to make this accessible to the general public, I think what would need to happen, because it's a cloud-based environment, is we would need to have some idea of volumes, and then working with the vendor, say, look, here's an enterprise cost for you that allows you to expose it to X number of hits per minute or hour or week or whatever it might be. I don't know what the exact answer was. I would have to get the vendor to respond to that directly. But there's going to be an infrastructure load. So that's what we would need to calculate and then figure out what's the cost on the platform.
Yeah, and I suppose, yeah, there's not going to be an easy. I mean, the vendors would want to cater for some sort of a user count or user bucket or something like that. So then I'd be like a suggestion.
Some kind of limit to make it viable. Yeah. So that's why I say that the two approaches. The one would be is to pull, for example, a reference data list out and publish it as a web page, or to pull information out, a message body and publish it, for example, as a JSON message and push it onto your Kafka feed or something like that. So there are absolute ways of doing it, but you would want to minimize the impact on the load on your servers. So you would want to control how that's done and then make the public stuff available via, for example, your public website.
Yeah. Cool. Gary, thanks a lot for this. I need to drop off. It was really informative and I found it useful. And please excuse me. Have a good evening.
Thanks, Gary. Any other questions from anybody else?
Hi, it's Tony again. I have one last question. To what extent do you see organizations that are using things like Agile, Lean, DevOps, those kind of concepts, using tools like this?
I'm going to be rude if I answer the question. So the honest answer is that, in my judgment, the bulk of people that say that they're using Agile actually aren't. Yeah. So that's a starting point. But having said that, I think that tools like this lean themselves extremely well to Agile. And my personal opinion is that data management projects lean themselves extremely well to Agile. And it comes back to that concept of going, let's solve for the immediate problem and then build incrementally on it. So the mistake that we make with the technology is to try and say, we want to define all of our business terms. And that's going to be our project step number one. And it's going to take us 6 months, and we're all going to sit in a room and argue about the definition of customer until we've got that right. Whereas the Agile model says, let's get a definition of customer that's broadly usable and publish it. Then let's get feedback, and if the feedback warrants it, let the responsible parties make the necessary updates, and they can do that as a task that's happening on the fly. And what tools like this do is they enable collaboration. They're basically giving you a single point of reference. They're giving you the workflows to make sure the right people are involved and engaged. One of the things that I can choose to do, for example, is I can say, let's go to accounts receivable. I can say, I just want to follow this particular, asset. So now I'm choosing as a business user to add myself as a follower. And by doing that, anytime somebody tries to make a change to this, I'm going to get a notification saying, somebody's changing this. Do you want to get involved in the conversation? So that's really the goal, is to facilitate collaboration so we don't get into these long arguments. And that works really well with an Agile approach.
Thank you.
So maybe, Gary, maybe to put a slightly different tack on that and what Tony's referring to, but when we build these data strategies and we talk about the roadmap in terms of how we're going to work our way towards doing the appropriate data management enablement and objectives, there's always a link to the program, the book of work, the projects, the sprints and stuff like that. But I'm assuming that's one thing, again, that you can either bring in from your PMO, whatever it is, and bring that into this area, and then to have those associations there.
Correct. So, you know, again, you can link to your Jira's or those kind of agile program management
Yeah.
tools. But it also takes, you know, I want to give a very specific example. Some years back, we did a data quality exercise for a bank. I won't mention the name again, and everything was paper driven. So we wrote the business requirements definition for the data quality rules, and there were about 50 rules. So let's say there's 50 pages of document that needed to be signed off by 30 different people in the business. That document went around the business and it was signed off by 7 people, and then person number 8 who had a problem on page 7, guess what happened? Go back to the Word document, update the document, reprint out the whole document, and start the whole signature process again for the whole document, because they just had no way of tracking changes efficiently. So what this is allowing me to do is to really get granular. I just want to change this element. You know, here's an action. We've got a data quality problem with this particular rule. What am I reporting as the data quality issue? Type it in, it's going to go to the right person, and they're going to then either ignore it but I've got a record. I know what's happened. I've got an audit trail of who's made what changes, and I'm involving the right people. So it's really trying to make make us work with data in a clever and intelligent way, rather than work stupid, bluntly.